Hello, Nav. Good morning. Here we are again.
Good morning.
Thursday. It has been wonderful getting to speak to you every single day of this week. And tomorrow's Good Friday, so Bank Holiday Friday. And
Yes.
we're going to, this will be our last session together.
Yeah.
I call it a session because it has been like therapy for me, if I'm completely honest. It's been wonderful speaking to somebody who knows what they're talking about and working through different topics that I'm interested in. And hopefully people who've been watching for the whole week have found this really interesting. So today we're going to be talking about addictions. But before we do, I just want to share with anybody watching Nav and who he is and how you can get hold of him. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about what you do as a therapist, just so that people know where to get hold of you and can reach out to you if they need to?
Sure. So primarily an addictions therapist. I've established a drug and alcohol rehab in India. I've been involved in various capacity, worked for the prison services here. I've worked in a private drug and alcohol rehab for pretty much all my stay in Britain in various capacities, from being a therapist to to a registered manager, to just all sorts of levels, and pretty much my whole life is around that. And of course, I'm also in my final bits of training to be a transpersonal psychotherapist as well. So, but at this point, I only work as an addictions therapist. Even though I cover the bases, but that's the sort of legit way to sort of do the bit, because I haven't finished my psychotherapy. But I am an established addictions counselor for almost 20 years now. While I've been doing other things as well. So, yeah, that's
That's
probably.
so we've got you, and we can ask you any questions that we like. And I think today the goal is to talk about addictions. And there's so many addictions. And if we're looking at the most obvious talked about addiction at the moment, which is social media addiction and addiction to things that are online, whether that's box sets, whether that's your phone. I wrote here, in fact, I love Simon Sinek, and I watched a video of his about 3 years ago where he talked about the millennials, and I'm actually a millennial. Can you believe that? In 1984, and anyone born after is classed as a millennial, so that means me. And one of the quotes I saw, he said that science has said that people who spend more time on Facebook than suffer with higher rates of depression than people who spend less time on Facebook. So let's just have a look at that. Why is that? Why does Facebook, social media, why does that create higher rates of depression?
I think before we sort of talk specifically, I'd just like to take a couple of minutes. I was most anxious talking about this topic, interestingly, because I guess it matters to me more than anything else. And I see that a lot of the work that I do with depression, anxiety, all sorts of different issues actually sort of also emanates from, or there is that sort of comorbidity aspect of, addictions or addictive behaviors being sort of at the root. So before we get to the internet, I think the first bit is just to form a base of what addictions are. What is an addictive behavior? What is addiction? I think and there are so many different takes on it.
Oh, excuse me.
God bless you. So I think one of the key things is to recognize, and people normally have a resistance with the word addict, or if alcoholic or whatever else, the words that's used, which sort of somehow isolates the person. Addictions can be various. They can be to substances, which is alcohol, drugs, or it could be behaviors and processes. So internet, shopping, pornography, all the non-substance based are the ones that are very hard to sort of pinpoint, because it's very difficult. There's not much tangible there. In terms of alcohol, there's a consumption, there's some intake. So drugs, there's an intake. So it's easy to pinpoint or recognize. Behaviors or process addictions can be very, very difficult because they're normally sort of hidden. They're not in the forefront. So that's one of the key parts. And one has to sort of recognize that, what does it do for us? Every time I'm seeking a behavior, I'm seeking a substance, what is it doing for me? Because we cannot sort of look at working on something or recognizing what addiction is till the time we recognize why that behavior is working for me. So I think it's so important to see that every time I say for example, go online, I interact or play some games, it's doing something for me, and it doesn't have to be something that's initially in the spectrum of or being negative. It starts with a very casual intake, but it slowly and steadily starts to sort of work in my my reward circuit, which is the pleasure circuit, the part which is about dopamine and all that. So I won't get into the science behind it much, but it physically alters the way our brain functions. Initially, uh, we engage in a behavior or a substance because it gives us some dimension of relief, some relaxation, and then uh, it sort of becomes counterproductive because my brain stops producing neurotransmitters or chemicals that actually help me on the natural rhythm find that relief or release. So we go into seeking the behavior again and again, which is where it becomes addictive because I normally can't manage my myself till the time I indulge in that behavior. And that's what happens. That's where something becomes very addictive because then and when I don't do that, I can feel anxious, depressed, sad, isolated, lonely, so many different feelings that, a lot of us present with. Our internal evaluation also starts to depend on, say, internet, for instance. I put a post in, how many likes do I get? My internal evaluation is based on also the likes I get. So if I don't get a certain amount, or if I compare it to another, I might end up feeling rejected or dejected. And it can have even stronger consequences. A lot of people actually uh, try to take their own lives because it becomes so unbearable for them, and they succeed in ending their lives, which is, of course, one of the saddest parts of what addiction does. But it's also so there are different dimensions to addictions. I like to look at it as I just don't look at it as one. I see as a human being, what are my dimensions? There's the multidimensional. There's the psychological dimension. There is the physical dimension. There is the spiritual dimension. There's my social dimension, and then there's the emotional dimension. So addiction also sort of impacts in all spheres. Uh, Emotionally, what does it do for me? I'm feeling bored. Suddenly, for that little moment, I get relief from boredom. I feel connected. From I've worked hard. I need to reward myself. Or let's celebrate. Let's have a drink, or let's do something. So it's the reward cycle. It's about sort of somewhere rewarding myself for a good work that I might have done on that day. So if you look at the physical dependencies, they're very minimal. You go to a doctor. You get detoxed. You work through it. One of the key things is that a lot of people relapse. We relapse into that old process because a lot of the work hasn't been done on the emotional dependence, the link between my emotions and the behavior, which is where therapy and long-term efforts and work comes in. How do I manage my boredom? How do I, in fact, there are schools of recovery that look at healing as learning to cope with boredom. So there's something called relapse prevention. So there's so many different ways. And when we talk about relapsing to what? We talk about relapsing to an emotional state that we struggle hard to do with. And millennials, for that matter, we've been brought up, I'm not a millennial, but I'm going to use the word we. Millennials are brought up in a way where their interaction with the gadget is very strong. So let's say if I'm holding my phone at a certain level like this, in a way I'm cutting off what's there. So it's also a barrier I create between the stimuli that I get from the outside world. This is no danger. So if I tap it, I get an instant feedback. It's designed that way. The stimuli it feeds off, but my brain is not learning to interact with or pick up the subtleties of emotional subtleties of social relations. When we when the non-verbal cues that we train ourselves to pick up. Our cognition, our intelligence might be highly developed because there's information at hand, but our emotional quotients might be very hard to work with. And that's what you'll see, and I'm generalizing here, but you'll see that a lot of people on the addictive spectrum would have very high IQs, but would struggle with low EQs. Again, it's a very general statement. And by that I mean their relationship with their emotions. And then there's the social dependencies. My reliance on Britain by its very nature. One of the social interactions have been you going to a pub and hanging out there. So the dependency there, the instance is not on alcoholism, but it's just that when I hold that drink, I interact with somebody else. So the association of social interactions is with alcohol. Celebration in restaurants around that glass of wine, which is meant to be a certain way. So it also is seen as a lifestyle representation. Now, let's say if I'm giving that up, I have to learn to work through the loss of that social interaction. I have to learn to work through the emotional dependencies, through the physical, the doctors take care of, psychological, trying to imagine a life without substance, just to think that, oh, I'll never do that behavior again. So abstinence. I'm a die-hard fan of abstinence. There are other programs like harm minimizations and all. Not the greatest spokesperson for it, so I won't go into it. But I guess I'm myself in recovery for 19 years for multiple addictions. So it's a topic that's, as you can see, the rhythm of my speech today is slightly more excitable. It's because I feel so passionately about it. I'm like I said, I'm in my 19th year of recovery from various addictions. So yeah, it speaks a lot.
That's great, because you can talk about this as somebody who's actually walked the path, and I think it's very important for people to understand that when you go to see Nav, and actually being somebody who has recovered, who has been in that place, who knows what it feels like, I think is a great thing to have for anyone, because in all sorts of things, and I don't know if I should, I wouldn't want to take advice from somebody who's about raising children who's never had any, because I'm just we haven't experienced it, you don't know how it feels. It's very good to teach people from outside, but you have to be, I think the darker the past, the more knowledge and wisdom you have and the more you can share. And when we're talking about addiction, as you're speaking about it, I just keep asking the same question over and over again in my head. How do we nip it in the bud? How do we prevent it? If we look at the social media side of things and about I'm all about communication and relationships and self-esteem and growth. So if we're looking at my children are 7 and 8, and they've got iPads, they've got devices, and we recognize that when you have a device, it creates dopamine and it gives you that level of feeling good, like you've worked out, and it creates all that. But then once it's gone, the dopamine fades, and then the sense to have it again, we get that. So what do we do? Because we live in a society where, what are we supposed to do if we intellectually understand that we're living in a world that creates these addictions because of the way that what do we do then? Do we hide in a cave?
No, that's a very good question. I think the important part to recognize is not to hide in the cave. Quite the opposite. Is to form connections. There was Johann Hari who wrote his book, and he traveled the world, and there's enough TED Talks about him. And he coined this phrase, which was, well, there are others, Brené Brown's spoken about it, Gabor Mate has spoken about it. So many people have gotten to it. Is the opposite of addiction, if anything, is the word connection. And what it's talking about is forming connections. So one of the key things is for parents to sort of actually form strong, deep connections, something that is what you talk about a lot. You talk about relationships and children and affirmations and, all the sort of positive realms. That is the work. The work is about allowing the individuality to form healthy relationships. And a part of that healthy relationship is also to be able to sit with the rejections in those relationships, the hurts that come in. So we naturally develop a way not to have to sort of run to soothe ourselves when there is pain or discomfort, but draw from our own inner strength. But if my inner strength is formed on your approval of me, which is what social media does, and that development hasn't happened, and the links happen, and you see, we're human beings. Have patterns. They have behaviors. We all work in a certain rhythm. We all work in a certain way. Now, so for me, my response, if I am somebody whose attachment styles are secure, then they would be secure in almost everything I do. I'd be a secure person at work. I'd be a secure husband, secure son, and that's what I'd create. But if I'm an insecure person, I'd be insecure at work. I'd be insecure at So I think the whole idea is to learn to and train ourselves to get into that place of security, and that security starts with primary primary caregivers, the home, the ones where we form that internal locus of control. Because with addictions, and this is Dr. Gabor Mate, he's exceptional in this, and he says that you can almost trace back, well, not all addictions come from trauma or abuse, but a lot can be traced back to pain as the core. Because addiction or addictive behaviors, internet or whatever else as pornography, is actually giving us temporary relief. And it does not mean we relief from stress or anything, but it's just a release or a relief. It just helps me become connected for that moment. Of course, it's the it was equally counterproductive, because as I connect, I also go back to the primal state. In fact, I don't go back to the primal state. I go to a slightly lesser thing. So if I started at point A, as what I'm feeling right now, I get to point B, which is, I feel better. And then once the effects worn off, I come back to A initially. And then every time I sort of go lesser than A. Then I need the substance every time just to get to A, because my state is now A minus. So B is still a far cry. So it's about more likes, more posts, more things to do, more rhythms. And we transfer our addiction onto, again, seeking from the outside, because the inside does not feel secure.
Absolutely. And I think that moment, what you just mentioned about seeking to get back to where you were, which you can't get back to because now you've seeked so much that you actually can't reach that, was a real turning point. And for me, I used to smoke cigarettes and I used to drink, and I don't drink and I don't smoke. I haven't smoked for 7 years now and haven't drank alcohol for 9 months. And I think, thank you. And when I understood I love that idea of, we're on a timeline and where you are now is at A, and then you use alcohol or drugs or social media or anything to get you to B. But then once that's worn off, you don't go back to A, you go behind A. So then everything you're doing, you're trying to get back to A. So there's lots of people who are in that state at the moment who understand the concept. So how or what does a person need to do to go, like, I've been there where I'm like, I recognize that this is not healthy, and I recognize that I can't seem to get back to A.
Yeah.
Then how does somebody, how do they get from where behind A to A? Like, when they come to you, what's the first thing that you do with what we're calling them, a patient?
Clients. Yeah, in this country, it's mostly clients, and it changes. I mean, in India, there were students or patients, but here it's clients. Yeah. So I think one of the key things for any kind of therapy, and of course, in this, me speaking to you is sort of more psychological or psychoeducation. We're talking about things. But if I'm sitting with the person, what is the key thing? What makes me feel comfortable with the person is the fact that they're open. They're welcoming. They're non-threatening. They give me a safe container to sit with. The basic core conditions, the same things that actually they may or may not have had at their home. Just giving them a place to just go, oh, this is fine. The room feels good. The environment's safe. The guy doesn't feel threatening. He's not going to be critical of me. Acceptance, positive regard. The core conditions of this thing. So first bit, and that's exactly what you need to do with someone. You don't challenge people with addictions. I remember this story, if that helps. I'll just share that, and it's sort of a backtrack. In my recovery, when I was trying to recover from addiction, I was struggling, and I had this person who made a very important impact in my life. And he told me this story, which was wonderful. And he said he'd attended this conference somewhere where everybody else was there, all the top doctors, everybody'd come, and they were talking about, the criminality behind addiction. They were talking about the social judgments behind addiction, everything. And then there was Mother Teresa there. And he says Mother Teresa came, and he was one of the guys speaking at the conference. He's very renowned in India, is very well regarded. And Mother Teresa, or Saint Teresa, she is now, came there on the stage, and little demure woman, and she said, "What we need to do with addicts is we need to give them love. We need to hug them." And she says, and the doctor, the person I'm speaking about, he says everybody just kept quiet because she had touched upon the core of healing. love is the core of healing. And I'm not saying give it unconditionally, you know.
It is goosebumps,
Yeah.
like goosebumps all over my body.
Yeah.
Because
I
that,
love that story. Every time I hear it, I still get moved by it because that carries the truth. And that love doesn't have to be, it's the love. You won't give your child the extra candy just because, they love you more. I'm not talking about that sort of love. I'm talking about, boundaries, sometimes even tough love. And that's the key thing.
yes,
That is the essence, because in love, there's connections. In love, there's boundaries. In love, there's, regard, respect. So all the core traits. So a recovery or healing is about learning to reparent or reparent the other person. And by that, I mean, just allowing the self to develop. Again, I'm sort of, broad basing it. So my
I agree. I honestly, I agree with everything you say. And I think for me, I'm somebody who's always looking for a solution. Like, I get it, we're human beings and life is, but whenever I watch anything, wherever I learn anything, my question is always, how do we make this better? What can we do now? Like, it's the past, it's happened. And how can we do that? And every single time, the answer, and even now, I asked you the question and I didn't really know what the answer was. But every time the answer is love. But still, every time when I ask the question, I forget that it's love because love is at the core of everything that we do. And it's learning to love yourself, which is so important. And sometimes I think that's why I love what I do. Like, my whole thing is about cheering people on, but my cheering is coming from a place of me seeing them and loving them and knowing that they can be more than they think they are. And that could be that is Christianity. That, like, for me, that's what my connection is with God, is knowing that there's something more than me that loves me more than I even know I can. And I feel like I'm a vessel, and that's what I do. So love, when you love somebody, no matter who they are, I think that's the first step. But then after loving somebody and them loving themselves, I highly recommend anyone watching, the next thing is go and see a therapist, go and see somebody. Like, you can have all this love for yourself. You can,
it's self-love, isn't it? I mean, if you go and you say, I'm going to take care of myself, I'm going to let somebody else in and ask them for help, that is also love. You're beginning to, it doesn't feel like our sort of definition of love. And it might be really distressed when I go to a therapist. I see my therapist weekly. That's my form of self-love. It's just saying, well, I owe myself that. I'll take care of me. I'm a therapist. I know the cognitive concepts, but I know this is not just about knowing, as you said. It's about being and doing. You promote doing a lot. So in that doing, the action, and sometimes the doing is being, is just stopping and sitting and allowing ourselves that those 50 minutes in a therapy session, that offers me space and time to look at myself. And that's where therapists of all modalities come in. Go to whoever. I'm not saying, go to anyone you feel safe with. It's like a shoe you wear, where you're given regard. And a part of that is psychoeducation. A part of that is holding. Pretty much what you do as a mother. You guide your children, you hold your children, you're emotionally supportive of your children. You do all that. That's pretty much, without sort of discounting. I'm not saying, in a way, all mothers are therapists, but
it's love. And do you know what? It's unconditional love. And unconditional love, if I could have a t-shirt that just said unconditional love, and people say, what do you mean unconditional love? Loving somebody unconditionally, no matter what they do. I don't love you when you do well in a test. I don't love you when you win a race. It's not that I love you more because you've done something for me. I love you because I love you, and there's nothing you could do that can make me love you less, because my love is infinite. To have that, to know that you're in that, to have that is very rare, because all of us are healing from our past before. So if we could start that now and go and see somebody and speak to somebody and share a part of yourself. But this is the problem though, Nav. What do we do about this? I've got another problem for you.
Sure.
The people who come to see you have got to a canyon. They're at a place in their life where they're like, I'm either going to digress or I'm going to progress. And then picking up the phone or emailing you or contacting you is jumping over that canyon. It needs 2 feet and a big jump and a massive pool of self-love. The people who come to you if they've come on their own will and they haven't been forced there, have a little flicker of light for themselves. But I speak to many people who would never, you have to have a little bit of self-love to to ring somebody, to email somebody, to go to the gym, to do all those things that create that natural flow of feel good. But this whole nation of people that will never invest that time because they don't have any love for themselves. What would you say to anyone watching who doesn't believe in themselves enough to even contact you?
Look, it's a hard one, and the very fact that you can't make anyone do anything. At the end of the day, the momentum, that little jump, despite all our fears, interestingly, in the fellowship or the 12 step, there's a cliche, or there's things which is about fear, which is face everything and recover, or forget everything and run, FEAR. So and I like that, because at the end of the day, a fear by itself serves a purpose. So if I can't and I'm not ready for that momentum, or I'm not sort of in that place, that means at some level the pain is not excruciating enough for me to seek it. Because when it does, we go seek the doctor, and some don't, and it happens, and that's why it's so tough. And again, when we were talking about love, don't get me wrong, it's very, very hard to love somebody with an addictive personality. It is exhausting as the loved one to be there. But I think their part of loving themselves is also to seek a therapist, or to go to someone they can speak to, because at that, the unconditional love would be about, not facilitating the addict, about setting those boundaries that you find so hard, about not owning the primary addict's behaviors as your responsibility, which is really hard. As hard as it is for the other, it's also hard for the loved one. But the unfortunate part, and is that it only works when the person, for me, it didn't work when my mom wanted it to work for me, or my father, or my girlfriend at that point in time. It worked for me when I was ready. And it was a tough journey afterwards. Don't get me wrong. It took me a very long time, but somewhere the hunger was there. Because at the time the hunger wasn't there, I just kept on.
I hear you. I think there has to be a trigger in anything, whether it's you're going to go and sign up to a gym membership, whether it's you're going to change the way you eat, change what you do. I think in everything there is a trigger. There's something that happens where you say, do you know what, like you said, either false, what did you say, fear is what? Because I've got fear as false evidence appearing real. That's what I think of fear. But you just said two other types of fear.
So one is forget everything and run, which is, and the other is face everything and recover.
Right. So I think that they're the trigger points.
The opposite of that. So I guess what it's talking about is the courage, to, and it is lacking in someone, because, it's almost like saying someone, oh, well, if you did this, then you'd be better. They're like, oh, well, I can't do that, which is my problem. So which is the tough one? Because the problem in itself is the lack of ability to seek momentum or to seek help. So that, which is where the unfortunate part is, that a lot of people do die from this. And it's not even the death, it's the life they live. Is probably more painful than what death might be. And death might be for them a relief, and which is why so many people are lost to addiction. This is the current pandemic. It kills more people than anything else would. COVID-19.
Say that again. What kills more people?
Alcoholism, addictions. There are more people that die from it and associated issues. It's a bigger pandemic. But again, I'm not comparing that. So due regard to all the sort of pain, but in its any form is not.
I did a little post a while ago after Caroline Flack passed, because I had loads of people say, "What do you think about this? What do you think about this?" Because I talk about mental health a lot, and I didn't talk about it straight away because I was afraid, because I knew what I wanted to say, but I was afraid that it could be misinterpreted. But luckily, people did hear it for what it was. And where you say pain, like that's the only, in everything that I've ever done, because I really do struggle with non-verbal cues and understanding just the things that most people get quite quickly. everything I do, I always have to put myself in their shoes and say, what must have happened to make them act like that? What must have happened? So when Caroline passed away, I sat down and thought about not just her, but lots of other people who have taken their own lives, and thought about what one common thing must have they all had in common. And it's pain. It's the pain being so painful that actually taking your life seems like an option, a way out. Taking your own life seems like it might stop that pain. And I think until you've been in a position where you have been in so much pain that you've thought about taking your life, I don't think you can comment, because you won't understand how painful it can get. To like, what would make anyone take their own life? Like, I'd think that I'd have to have like a shark eating my body alive, and then someone gives me a gun and I go, yes, because that would be better than being eaten alive. Or, you know, someone burning me to death. That would be, I'm thinking all the times when I would be willing to take my own life, and I'm thinking about the worst possible things, and it all relates to pain.
I mean, Dr. Gabor Mate, you know, I don't know how long we have, but one of the last things I'd say is Dr. Gabor Mate, and in his beautiful book, In the Realms of Hungry Ghosts, I recommend it to all the people who want to.
Say the book.
In the Realms of Hungry Ghosts, it's a Bible of recovery. I quite like it. It wasn't aptly clear. I think he says one bit which is about don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. What is the pain? And I think, and that sort of sums it up, because we say, what are you addicted to? I'm addicted to. What's the pain? What are you trying to get relief from? What's happening there? I think because it requires interaction, inputs, love, consistency, constancy. It's all that. It's exhausting. So, which is why it's easy, and I go, oh well, that's fine. Couldn't be bothered. Oh, it's okay. Like, tick, 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 feedback. I can shut it down or shut you off. I'm safe. Yeah, that's how it works. Same for any drug.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure having you in my life. So this week has been wonderful, and I hope that people were able to reach out to you and contact you directly, and maybe arrange something where they can get some support, because this is a time now in lockdown where a lot of things are going to bubble to the surface. There's going to be lots of things that are triggered that we thought we'd got rid of before. There's going to be lots of new things that happen that put stress on the mind and stress on the body. So don't be afraid to reach out and go to www.addictionsrecovery.co.uk and speak to Nav there and see if there's a way for him to help you with some of your own internal healing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.